Hello and welcome to this library session. I'm University Librarian Laura Rock, and today we're going to be talking about library resources, both books and articles. In this image we see the two Peanuts characters duking it out, Lucy and Linus, book versus article. But it really isn't a battle. Books provide a particular type of information and articles provide another type of information, and they both complement each other. So sometimes students will look to an article when they need to look at a book to answer their question, and vice versa. So we're going to take a closer look at that. Book resources, how do they help us? Well, they help us to understand our topic in a broader context. They provide a comprehensive overview of the topic with in-depth coverage, providing us with the history and chronology of that topic, which can help fill in gaps that you don't know about your topic. So this is always a good place to start in the research process. At the end of an entry in an academic or scholarly book or reference book, you'll generally find bibliographies to support what has been said, and these references might be to other articles, or they might be to other books, or they might be to websites. But still, there are sources that lead to other sources of information. This background information, you have a firm foundation for developing a research question. That's important because usually we start with a very broad topic. When we search for book resources, we search broadly. We can identify keywords that we might use for searching when we go into an article database. So it's an important step. Where do we find these book resources? Well, we can find print books and some ebooks in the library catalog. We can also find them using OneSearch, which is what we call a federated search that searches across all of our subscription databases. And we have both ebooks and journal articles in OneSearch. But you can also look for ebooks directly on an ebook platform. And there's different types of books. We can think of reference books like specialty encyclopedias, handbooks or dictionaries, and we usually call those reference books. Or we can talk about monographs, our chapter books, and we'll find a lot of those on the ProQuest ebook platform. And I'm going to be highlighting the library catalog, the Sage Knowledge Base, and the ProQuest ebook platform when we go live into the library homepage. But there's also an entire tutorial on navigating the library homepage. And if you haven't watched it, I would highly suggest, if you're new to the library or need a refresher of library resources and services, that you watch that. Articles differ from books in that they address a very focused aspect of a topic. They can be detailed, but very narrow in scope. The most recent literature on a topic is found in a periodical before the information would ever be found in a book, because books are going to look at the overall significant impact of the article literature as a whole. Not every article is necessarily going to have that kind of impact on a broad topic. Not everyone knows what is meant by a periodical, so we're going to take a closer look. Periodicals are publications that come out at regularly stated intervals, and they have no intention of ceasing. So it might come out daily, weekly, or monthly. It can vary. One example would be the newspaper. We see them come out daily with current news that's usually brief in nature. Most newspapers are written for the general consumer to understand. They would not be an appropriate periodical for the type of research in this class. A magazine is also a publication written for the general consumer. An article on racism in Time magazine would not be appropriate for your assignment. However, it might be a good way to get inspiration on topics, but keep in mind fresh news topics appear in magazines before they appear in scholarly journals. Another thing to consider about a magazine is its appearance and where it can be purchased. They're usually very attractive, bright, colorful, glossy, to get you to buy them off the shelf either from the grocery store or from a newsstand. You won't see that in a scholarly journal. Their covers generally are very plain, and you generally will find them in subscription databases. So social work today is an example of a trade journal, and that's written for a particular professional working in a particular field. So it's not for the general consumer. The articles, the terminology, the jargon that's used would not appeal or be understandable to the general consumer, but the social worker would find this very valuable to keep them abreast of what's happening in the field and conferences that are becoming available, products that might be appropriate to use. So they do serve a purpose, but again, they don't contain the empirical research that you'll find in a scholarly journal. They might talk about it, and it might motivate you to go to find it in the scholarly literature, but it wouldn't be appropriate for your assignment. You'll notice that the cover looks bright and colorful, and there are, as I said, some advertisements, but not nearly the type that you find in a magazine. The trade journal, all the advertisements are geared towards the professional, and there's a very small amount. You won't find an ad for OJ in social work today. Trade journals are also not available for sale on the public newsstand. Often they become available to you when you join a professional association as part of your subscription to that association. The articles in a scholarly journal are written by academic researchers for other researchers or scholars. So therefore the language is very academic, and it takes a bit of concentration to read it and digest it. You might be surprised to learn that people are not paid to get their articles put into a scholarly journal. Quite the opposite. There is great prestige in getting your article published in a peer-reviewed journal. These are generally, as I said, available through library databases, or you can get a subscription to a scholarly journal, but they are very expensive. So you won't find these freely available out there on the internet for the most part. Let's talk more about this peer review process, which is really an editorial process for articles submitted to a publication. Each publication has a specific author guideline that indicates how the article should be formatted when it's submitted, how they want the sections headed, what citation style to use, and any other stylizations that publication wants. In the peer review process, it's first submitted to an editorial office to make sure the author has followed these guidelines, but the content of the article is not reviewed at this point. If it passes, it moves on to an editor-in-chief. The editor-in-chief then examines the article content for originality and determines if the article is the right fit for the publication's readers. If it passes, it goes on to a panel of peer reviewers. Sometimes a journal will have an associate editor who coordinates the peer review process and helps select the appropriate peer reviewers. These are the subject matter experts on the topic. These experts independently evaluate the article. They determine if the appropriate methodology was used for the study and if there is a cohesiveness and accuracy throughout the paper. For example, do the results match what is being said in the discussion section? So is the data saying what they're concluding? They also assess whether the study makes a significant new contribution to the field of study. They examine to see if the paper is cited properly, and because of their expertise in the field, they are a barometer for plagiarism. Any weaknesses, comments, or recommendations for revision are documented and returned to the editor. The editor reads the recommendation from all the reviewers and either accepts the article for publication, rejects it, or sends it back to the author for revisions, whereby the process begins all over again. So it can take months or years before a research article actually makes it to publication. And you should know that this process is usually double-blinded so that the peer reviewers never know who the author is and the author never knows who the peer reviewers were. Peer review is a hallmark of quality. Therefore, it is an appropriate type of article for your assignment. There are several ways to know if your article is from a peer-reviewed journal. The easiest way is to use the database limiters within the library's databases. You can limit to academic or scholarly. You can limit to peer-reviewed. Terminology varies slightly, but it's very easy to limit your search. You can also use the database called Ulrich's Web. It's available from the library in our A to Z list, and this database can tell you what type of periodical it is when you enter the title or the ISSN number. It will tell you whether it's peer-reviewed, and it refers to it as refereed. It'll also tell you if it's a magazine or if it's a trade journal. It's important to point out that not all articles in a peer-reviewed journal are peer-reviewed. There's the primary research, that empirical research, the quantitative and qualitative studies. There are the review articles, the secondary literature that appraises or gathers information based on the primary research. However, there are also editorials, commentaries, letters to the editor, and book reviews. The latter should be avoided when you're doing your assignment. Stick to those primary and review articles. Now, in order to combine terms to find articles in a database, you need to understand how Boolean operators work. And you might remember these from your days of algebra. There are 3 of them: and, or, and not. We use and to combine separate concepts. So if we were looking at cultural competency and social workers, where do those two intersect so I can find an article about social workers that addresses cultural competency? So then we combine those two terms together with an and. And the result set would be that portion in the middle of that Venn diagram, that intersecting portion, so that your result set gets smaller when you use an and that's how we focus in on what we need. Sometimes our result set isn't large enough, or we may not quite have a handle on the terminology that we should use. So we grow that search using a Boolean or. So we might be talking about social workers or mental health workers or counselors. And so we join that together to broaden our search. So when the result set comes back, it can have term A or term B, or it could have both terms. So you see the large shaded area representing the result set. Sometimes we don't want a term to be included in our result set, and we use the Boolean operator not. So perhaps, and I'll use maybe a funny example, suppose you were looking for an article on boxers, but not dogs, because you don't want the boxer the dog, you want boxers the athletes. So in that case, that's how you might make use of the Boolean not. So if it's a term that might have multiple meanings and you want to exclude one, you would use not. I find students don't use it all that often, but you should be aware of it. I also want to talk about 2 research techniques: phrase searching and truncation. Phrase searching is for searching 2 words adjacent to each other. So if you have a concept that's represented by 2 words, like racial bias or ethnic socialization, you want to put it between double quotation marks so that the database finds that exact phrase. If we want to grow a search, another way we can do it is to use truncation, and we can search the root of a word to find other word endings of that word. So theory, T-H-E-O-R, asterisk, would find theory, theories, theoretical. So truncating back theory, and by chopping off the Y, allows us to find different word endings. They can vary by database, but in the databases we'll be working with today, it's definitely the asterisk. So where do we start? Generally, we start with a broad topic, and we take that broad topic and we look at a book source. We'll go to a reference book. We'll go to a chapter book. We'll go to a textbook. And we'll get further understanding. We'll gather keywords. But once we have a handle on the aspects of that topic, we can then use the information we found to focus in on a very narrow research question, such as how do parental attitudes about ethnicity and race impact peer relationships of children? If I were to enter that entire sentence into an article database, I would get 0 results because we cannot use it as we would in Google. We have to break it out into its keyword concepts. So parental attitudes, ethnocentrism, child-peer relationships. That final concept, child-peer relationships, is a little bit awkward, so I'm going to have to think a little further how I might represent that in the database. When I develop a search strategy, I usually start with the grid, and I'll put in the vertical column all of my concepts, so parental attitude, ethnocentrism, and peer relationships. And I join that with a Boolean and, each separate concept. And I decided on peer relationship for that last one. And then I want to grow the search. So perhaps it's not just peer relationship, maybe it's peer interaction. And then from my background research, I noticed the terminology intergroup or in-group being used as the types of relationships that they might have. This is sort of a balance between the broad idea of the concept and the narrow idea of the concept. So when I look at ethnocentrism, it's closely related to racism, not exactly the same, but it also involves prejudice and a sense of superiority. So I ordered those concepts in as well. Because we're doing keyword searches, we're looking for words that we think represent our concepts. What I think it is and what you think it is may be two different things. That's one of the reasons we use this background sources to get a sense of how things are being used. Once we get in the databases, we'll look at our result sets and see how they're used, because we don't know how the authors may have chosen to represent it. Once I have my grid complete, I think about applying some of those search techniques. You can see with the asterisk that I've tried to use truncation. And you can see with the double quotes, I looked at phrases like peer relationship or peer interaction. You have to be very careful because sometimes when you truncate, you can truncate back too far. So if we look at RACIS, it will pull up racist or racism, but it will not pull up race or racial. But I have to be careful because if I go too far back, I might pick up words that I don't want. So if I did RAC and asterisk, I might end up with words like racehorse or racetrack. And we don't want those types of terms appearing in our result set. So you have to be careful with truncation that you don't go back too far. But once again, searching is an iterative process, so maybe you try it this way. If you don't get good results, maybe you go back further. It's all experimentation to get that best result set or fruitful result set. We've been discussing keyword searching, but another way to search is by subject heading. And subject headings come from controlled vocabularies within a database. An indexer or cataloger will assign the article or book a heading which describes the aboutness of the content of that item. These headings are specific to each database, and searching on them provides highly relevant results. But it can sometimes be difficult to determine which heading to use. You can search the heading index directly, and it goes by different names in different databases, but an easy way to find a subject heading would be to locate the subject heading within the detailed record of an on-point entry. So you find something you like and you want to find more like it, look to the subject headings used to describe that entry. When we get to the library homepage, then the decision is what article database do we want to choose. You can use our databases by subject list and look for social work. You can go directly to a database through our database A through Z list. We're going to be taking a close look at the Academic Search Ultimate database, which is multidisciplinary, meaning it indexes journals from many different disciplines. OmniFile is another multidisciplinary database. Then there are a few subject specifics that you might want to explore, PsycInfo or SocIndex. The thing that all of these have in common is that they are EBSCO databases. And EBSCO is the vendor, so when you're communicating with me and you say, oh, I searched the databases and I ask you which one you used, you don't want to tell me EBSCO, you want to tell me Academic Search or PsycInfo. They all have a similar interface, being EBSCO databases. So that's why I'm starting with these 4, and this will give you, I'm sure, opportunity to find something you can use for your assignments. The other option is to use the OneSearch, the federated search, to find articles. So next we're going to go out into the library homepage, library.misericordia.edu, and we're going to do some live searching, and then we can put some of this theory, all this talk into action, and hopefully clear up some of the questions you might have. If you're in the MU portal, an easy way to access the library is through the quick links. Follow the quick link directly into the library, or type in library.misericordia.edu into your browser. And so we'll begin with the library catalog. You might want to enter your broad concept in. So we started with the topic of ethnocentrism, and you might think, well, this is where I'll start. And I have 9 results, and as I looked through the results, I wasn't so certain it was exactly what I needed. So let's click on one of the titles. Here we see the detailed record, and this particular book, by reading the title, is aimed at nursing. But it does identify another concept for me, cultural competency, which may be something that I want to explore. Now, as I look through, you can see ethnocentrism highlighted because when the database searches, the library catalog database, it is searching for these terms within this detailed record. And so it appears on this one particular chapter. It might or might not be helpful to you as a social worker. If I scroll down, I can look at the subject headings that were used. Again, I see cross-cultural comparison, cultural competency. Those might be useful to me. Another thing to think about would be searching even more broadly, because the term has to appear in that record. And sometimes the records are not that full. You don't get the table of contents. You do not get a detailed summary. That varies. It's not a required field in cataloging a book. So what you might do is think social work. And we're not going to use Boolean operators. We're not going to put in an and or not in the library catalog. Save that for the article databases. We're going to just maybe put minorities in. And as I look through the titles, to me this seems like a good hit and that I might find useful information. So let's click on this title. And I can see with the highlights why it pulled it up. And racial cultural identity development. Oh, this might help me in my particular research. These are hyperlinked so you can search on these subject headings. And I pick up some other useful headings too, like cross-cultural counseling. That might be useful. So we can click on any one of these and run a search and retrieve similar titles. So that's one way I use the library catalog. So while we did this search, you'll notice we did not retrieve any ebooks. If we had, over in the format area, there would be an electronic resources limiter. There are not a lot of ebooks in the library catalog. Most of them are held within ebook databases. But the ones that are in the library catalog are ones that your faculty may have requested. So I don't want you to skip it because the proportion is small. I also don't want you to skip it because you're a distance student and you can't come to the library for some reason. We can't send you the whole book, but what we could do is send you a chapter. So that chapter on ethnocentrism might be able to be sent to you if you qualify for document delivery. So I'm going to go back to the library homepage, and if you highlight the services tab, there is a subpage on document delivery, and you can read to see if you qualify. And if you have any questions, please just go ahead and ask our Access Services department. The SAGE knowledge base is an excellent reference source. Click on OneSearch, go to Databases A through Z, and access SAGE Knowledge. This database has both monographs and reference books, those encyclopedias, dictionaries I spoke of. One way to search it is to browse. In the upper menu, select Browse, and then browse by a subject. You won't find a subject for social work here. Click on Health and Social Care and scroll through, and you'll find one for social work practice, or keep others in mind for other courses. Look through this menu, but I'm going to click on social work practice, and then I'm looking for maybe multicultural social work, and there are 25 titles that they're identifying as relevant. So this might be useful. And if you click on the title, you can then go ahead and search right within the book and put search terms in. Or you could explode the chapters and see what they're about. Alternatively, we can just go ahead and search for our terms. When I enter ethnocentrism, I find several entries within different books. An entry within the Encyclopedia of Bilingual Education, the Sage Dictionary of Sociology, and there are many of them. If you click on the entry, you'll be taken right to that entry within the book. And if you prefer to read these in print, you can always download them as PDFs. If you use any of these resources, you'll want to be sure and cite them in your work. In the right-hand side are double quotation marks, which indicate citations within this database. If I click on it, it defaults to APA, and you could copy it to your clipboard. The thing you want to remember is that these are good tools for getting us started, but the responsibility falls on the user to make sure that it's accurate. And these tools do make mistakes, so you'll want to be sure and check the publication manual. I'm back at the library homepage, and I want to show you how to quickly access our ebook platforms. While they're in the A through Z list, there are several, such as ProQuest, that you can get to quickly. And you can use the information we learned from the library catalog and apply it here. You can do a search much like you do in other databases. And so I can type in social work and minorities. And receive relevant entries. So these are other sources of book information. I have an entire video on how to use ProQuest. You can explore that further if you like, but I just wanted you to be aware of your options. I'm back out at the library homepage, and to get to the article databases, we click on one search, and then we can go to databases by subject, scroll down, and expand social work to see relevant databases for students studying social work. I highlighted a few databases in the PowerPoint: Academic Search Ultimate, OmniFile, PsycArticles or PsycInfo, and SocIndex. These are all EBSCO databases, and they are familiar as far as functionality goes, so that might help you find something. You can transfer the skills very easily. We can also go to the databases A through Z list. Academic Search Ultimate can be accessed directly alphabetically. So what I want to show you is more a process than a recipe. So one of the things I would like to do is show you some of the struggles that you might go through. So first I would start by putting in my concepts. Again, I'm using truncation and I'm entering it between double quotes. It's a phrase. Then I'm going to join it with my second concept. Notice I go to the next line and I'm anding in that concept. And the third concept was peer relationships. And since I found nothing, I might want to tweak it a little. Maybe I'm going to go back and do peer relations, peer relationships, and that didn't help. So what would I do? Well, let's expand each of these concepts. And as I go along, I might want to run a search just to see the impact it's having. So that's not really helping. So one of these other concepts needs to be represented differently to find something in this database. Okay, but not great yet. So one of these concepts has to be improved. So let's try and notice I'm typing all my ORs in capital letters. That's because in some databases it's required to be in caps. This particular database doesn't care either way, but still it's a good habit to get into. Now that seemed to help my search results go up. Now we're up to 44. I'm going to use some of the terminology that I saw when I was doing my background searching. And that seemed to help a lot. So as I scroll through, let's see how relevant these titles are. These seem to be right on target. Now let's click on one of the titles. And what is the database actually searching? It's searching the title. You can see the bold lettering. It's searching the subject terms. So this is that controlled vocabulary that I told you about. Perhaps we can find something else that we can use, like interpersonal relations. And these are author-supplied keywords. So authors supply these so people can discover their articles. So maybe friendships was a good way to think of it, but it did pull it up because of the word intergroup, and it's a very specific type of friendship. And here's the abstract. This is what your keywords are searching on. The abstract is a description of what the article is about. And that's very useful if the article is not available full text, because you want to read that to be sure it's something you want to go through the trouble interlibrary loaning. Well, let's go back to our result list. Let's talk about these limiters on the left now that we have our results set. So talking about full text, do not limit to full text. What happens is no longer can you link out to other articles that we might have in another article database. So that wouldn't work. But if you have the HTML or PDF full text, you immediately know it's in this database. So I'm going to unclick that. So it's not necessary to use. So let's look at this first article. There's no PDF here. When I link out, it tells me we don't have it in another database, so you're going to have to try and get it through interlibrary loan. That would be called our TPASA. That's our interlibrary loan service. And you need to fill out the asterisk fields. They're pretty self-explanatory, but I just want to mention that the needed before date is what could be considered a cancellation date. So if you think, well, I need it before tomorrow, and you really can wait, 2 weeks, then you don't want to put tomorrow, you want to put 2 weeks, because the date you enter is the date your request will get canceled. We suggest giving 7 days. Many times it comes in sooner. Sometimes we can't get it at all. So give yourself plenty of time, and you will be notified either way. When it comes in, you can view it 5 times or within 30 days. So be sure and download it if you get it in. Okay, some of the other limiters that we have are publication date. So you might want something, say, a little more recent. and it will update your results within that publication parameter. Now, we want to limit to academic journals. Depending on your search query, you may have other options, conference papers, theses, newspapers. You want to limit to academic journals. And that eliminated the magazine from our results set. Also, use the language limiter, limit to English, because it can be deceiving. Sometimes the title will be in English, but the actual article is in Spanish or another language. So make sure you use that. I'm going to click back on the title to show you a couple of features in the tools. If you use this article and you'll need to cite it, you might want to use the cite feature. Scroll down, find your citation style, and then again, it's your responsibility to verify that it's accurate. You can't just copy and paste it. I see an error in the way that the article title is formulated here. They capitalize the first letter of each word in the title, and that's incorrect. So you need to go ahead and verify that. One other thing, if you're going to share this with an instructor or even myself, make sure if you're going to share an article and have questions, you click on the permalink and then use the permalink when you're referring to someone else, not what's in the address bar on top. Once you close out the browser, this will no longer pull up your article. This is permanent. It will bring me right back to the article. There's one last database I want to look at, and that's Ulrich's Web. Go to OneSearch, Databases A through Z, and U for Ulrich's Web. Ulrich's Web can tell us if a journal is peer-reviewed. So perhaps you found your article while you were out searching on Google Scholar, and you want to know if you are looking at a peer-reviewed journal. Then we're going to type in the name of the journal. Suppose it was Family Process. And when I look through my results set, I can see who the publisher it is. We can verify it with its unique identifier, its ISSN. And I can see this shirt here, this refereed shirt, and that tells me that it's peer reviewed. If I click on the title, it provides me with more details, and I can see that it's an academic scholarly journal. So Ulrich's Web, another way of checking whether your journal is peer-reviewed or another type of periodical. So that concludes our session. I hope you learned something new that you can apply when you're working on your assignments. I hope that you won't be frustrated by the process and do indeed see that it's a process, and that even for myself, entering the terms is a learning experience, and I just learn from what I find and move on. So don't get frustrated, but if you have any questions, please feel free and reach out to me regarding your social work research. If you have questions about writing your papers or creating and using citations, reach out to the University Writing Center. I wish you well in your research.